Ronge. Dear students, ladies and gentlemen, now we have a lecture by a very interesting person, Fölker Ronge, in the time of when KPI University organized with the Institute for Publishing and Printing its international life. Professor Ronge was one of the first who take active part in this process. Thus, Institute for Printing and Publishing in 90s or the first years of millennium or the first or the 21st century underlined the trade between KPI and Wuppertal University about cooperation, and thus the cooperation, international cooperation of our institute was started and began. Thus, Fölker, I want to say about name, different name, Fölker Ronge, but Fölker, it's folk people in folk here. It's one, господин, it's people's mister. That's the meaning of the first name. Thus, you see the theme of lectures, of our lecture, and the Newspaper Spinnet Story Continued. It's very interesting thing, and I should like to give the word to Professor Fölker Ronge.
Welcome to all of you. I'm happy that you're willing to follow me talking in English. Englishmen usually start such kind of talks or lectures with a joke, and we have a very nice situation in this case concerning the joke. It's a very original and innovative kind of joke. Nobody knows what a snippet is. I'm very glad that you've come here, although you are not knowing what a snippet is, and whether there is a problem or an issue with snippets. The most interesting thing is that Anastasia read this snippet as a spinnet. So she invented a new term. So there's no term at all of spinnet, but she was able to invent it, much originality, and then she even disseminated this new term to Professor Schäfer. He learned it, and now there are already two people using a new term which does not make any sense. Whereas snippet is making a sense, and I will tell you a little bit about that, and you will see how important this issue of snippets is. My lecture is in a way multi-dimensional. I talk about mass media, which you normally address as SME, information. Mass media development, and in this context, the relationship between technology and business. Another dimension of my lecture concerns or relates to the rise of digital information and today's struggle between conventional media information or communication, as we call it, particularly press and online information and online media. Then there is a dimension related to the marketing of newspapers. And the last point, and I think the most important point of this list of dimensions, is the question of intellectual property rights, which is all these dimensions are touched by what I'm talking to. Why do I say it's not only the story, but my story? And why can I talk about the continuation of this story? I know that it's very extraordinary, because normally we would hear stories in your lectures, and normally it's not personal or individual kind of stories. It is my story because I have already published on that. I've not published that what I'm talking today, but there is a history of that. There is a publication. I just tell it to you. It is a conference paper. It was called The Topical Career of Newspaper Snippets, and what she tells us about press and communication and culture. It was published in the last year in a conference at Ufa, at the university at Ufa in Russia. So from this point of view, it is my story, which I began in 2013, and it's a continuation of this publication, and I'm now talking about what has happened with this issue, what has happened with this subject in social reality of the world. The main thing is on property, intellectual property or copyright, and the licenses which are connected with copyright. This copyright and license topic is normally neglected in your studies. Practically nobody has an idea what copyright is, for what it is useful, and why it is so tremendously important in the economy. Well, I could ask you, for instance, who is the economic owner of a diploma thesis? Who is the economic owner of a diploma thesis? I'm not sure that you know an answer to that. And I guess you have never discussed about that, or never heard anything about this kind of question. Or, another question, what is the main issue of an author's contract with a publisher, the publishing company? What is written in an author's contract between an author and a company? What are the main topics, what are the main subjects of such a treaty, such an agreement? Or, are copies or parts of copies which you take from books and journals, are this allowed? Are you allowed to take things from a book, take sentences or pictures or something like that from a journal's article, and so forth? How is the legal situation concerning these quotations, as we call it, or citations? Are you allowed to quote from the book? And if yes, why? On which legal basis are you allowed to do that? If you do that, and afterwards copy it, how many copies are you allowed to make? Will you make thousands of copies and then sell the copies afterwards? I'm sure you don't know, you've never heard about this problem. Or, if you make a presentation, can you use the first page, the front page of a book for your presentation? Is it allowed to use that? Or is there a copyright on the front page of a book which you are not allowed to use for whatever purpose? these are questions which are important in the commercial life where authors produce articles, and there must be a ownership, a property of these products of authors. Every morning, after my breakfast, I start the day with the same manner, the same way. I started first by Google News. I go to my computer, get into Google News. I suppose I must not explain to anybody what Google News is. And then I go to a kiosk and buy 2 newspapers. Every day, 2 newspapers, a national one and a local one. So I'm informed in different ways every morning. Google News, online information, and traditional newspapers. These 2 different kinds of mass media are related to each other. I see your looks, sure to change something. That's what I told you, I'm sorry. And when I ask you, this is my model. So, shall I do it again? Lecture on these topics. This is the citation of my article. This is why this topic is important even for you. This is my everyday, my morning. Now, first question is, what is Google News? You know that, but you know nothing. The point is, in this context, snippets play a role. Because Google News is based on information not from journalists or from its own redakcja or something like that. Google News is based on information taken from newspapers and also from TV and journals and so forth, but mainly newspapers. These informations are taken from several hundred kind of sources. And in Google News you find just a little bit of what is written or shown in the article which is quoted. So one could say Google News is a second-hand information. So the first hand are the newspapers who have published, or TV or so forth. Everybody knows Google News or not? This is Google News. It looks like that. It's original some days ago. And what we call a snippet is within the red circle. It is taken, the headline of a newspaper article. It is said from which source it is, when it was published exactly, not only the day but even the minute. And then there are 1 or 2 sentences which are taken from this article in original. It's not an abstract or something. They take just the words by which the article is starting. Right? The next one is already another kind of snippet. Now, 1 point further, back to the newspaper articles. Who is the owner of a newspaper article? It's not just easy. Normally, according to the copyright laws, and every country has any sort of copyright law. According to these laws, the author is the owner, the economic owner of his or her product, who is the author of a newspaper article, is the journalist owner. As a journalist who has written this article, now he is the owner. If the author is the owner, the journalist is the owner, he could sell this article to others. When he's the author, he's open, he's free to go with this article to everybody. Say, please give me 50,000 hryvnia for this article. That I allow you to publish it. This can, however, not be the case when you talk about publishing houses or newspapers. So the author of an article for a newspaper gives the monopoly right to this newspaper to use it. It normally is not the right to sell the same article to others. Normally. There might be a difference when you talk about so-called freelancers. There are freelancer journalists who might be able to sell the same article to different media. But in all cases, there is a special agreement, special treatment on that. Now, who can sell it, such an article? Are the owners the journalist and also the publisher? Is the ownership divided between both of them? How's the situation? Again, questions of copyright law. What about quotations from an article? Can everybody use a newspaper article for whatever kind of purpose? For instance, selling this quotation to others because they're interested and are willing to pay for that. Is that possible or not? So there are a lot of very tricky questions concerned with the content. Now, in principle, and this is different from country to country, the laws are different. In principle, in practically all laws, maybe apart from China, with the exception of China, the author is also the economic owner. He's not only the intellectual owner, but he's also the economic owner. He's the only owner in principle. According to this ownership, there is a time limit in the laws normally. There is also an international agreement on copyright. Normally, the right, property right, is for 70 years. So, also goes to the, after your death, goes to the inherited people. So the authorship is upheld independent from your living situation. So my children could get the property of an article which I wrote. The whole time, utmost limit is 70 years. Now the special problem for journalists, or special point for journalists, for instance, journalists are normally employed in publishing houses. And normally it's part of the labor treaty, the labor contract between the employer and the employed, that the journalist gives the right, property right of articles to the owner of the publishing house, to the newspaper publisher. This is part of the treaty, the agreement between the employer and the employed, and it is necessary, because otherwise the journalist would keep the right of his or her article. So normally it's transferred to the employer. So then in the copyright laws, there are specific and only very few exceptions from this general situation of authorship and ownership. There are two ones different from country to country. So you have to look to your Ukrainian copyright law in order to find out how it is organized and regulated here. There are normally two purposes which are open, that you can use intellectual property, meaning text or pictures or videos or whatsoever. There are two purposes as exceptions. One is normally an exception for scientific research and for education. Certain exceptions, they are not open or they are not unlimited. You must exactly look to the limits. For instance, if you use, in Germany, if you use copies from a book for a school class, it is in principle allowed to do so without asking the author, but only up to 30 copies. So if you have a class with 50 pupils, you have a problem. A problem according to this law. And another exception from this principle might relate to very small quotations. So it's a problem of scale and not a problem of purpose, which makes up the exceptions. There might be other rules and regulations in other countries, but this is a kind of standard exception to the standard copyright law. Now, this was the fundamental aspects which you should know in order to understand my story and my case. Now, the case is a conflict or a struggle or a war between Google and newspapers or publishers of newspapers. As I said, Google takes snippets from newspapers. And Google does that with a business purpose. Google gets income from informing you via Google News. For you it's free, but for Google it's an income. Because on these pages are advertisements. And these advertisements have been paid for. So there comes money from the advertisers to Google. And Google is able to do this information for free in the web because it gets money in this way. That's easy to understand. Now the question is, the newspapers whose snippets are used for the business of Google News had the idea. We have produced these things by which Google gets income and profits. Why not we? Because we were the authors, and day by day we are the authors of these information by which Google gets richer and richer. It's unfair, isn't it? This was a conflictual situation, and by the way, this is a situation in a lot of countries wherever Google News has a certain importance, and wherever you have a number of publishers who want to survive on the markets. This is the struggle. The publishers, you have normally big ones also. So the publisher is not just one newspaper, but you can have a publisher who has 20 newspapers producing in different regions, and can also have other kind of journals, special journals, for instance, on automobiles, on computer, on sports, and all these fields. So you can have very big publishing companies. So they were very ambitious. what Google was doing. And they had the feeling, I think the good, correct feeling, that the more Google News is used, the less is the use of newspapers. So the newspapers produce something which is not only unpaid, but is also to the loss of the newspapers. Because in the long run, look at what you are doing. In the long run, more people are looking only to Google News. Whereas I'm still different because of my age. I also buy newspapers. So I use both. But if Google News will be the standard way of getting information, the people will not buy a newspaper in addition. So it's a double problem for the newspaper, for the publishers. This kind of Google News business, this model of Google News business. And that the business model of Google is news production without paying anything for that and getting a lot of profit. Google is extremely rich by this kind of information portal. The publishers say this is to the loss of themselves, and in the long run they will even be bankrupt by this kind of model. Google made a counter-argument to what the newspaper and the publishers said. And the counter-argument is a question of marketing. So Google said, when we use your snippets every morning, we help the readers, the users, to be interested in this article and then go to the kiosk and buy the newspaper. So they said, we are doing marketing for you. Why are you angry? And this marketing is without any costs for you. Okay? All that depends upon the case, the fact, whether people are really using a newspaper article after having read the Google News snippet. This is an empirical question. Does it function or does it not function? When I look to you, I know it does not function. But this can be different. It's an empirical question. But this was the argument, the counter-argument of Google to the newspaper publishers. Now, a big issue in several Western countries. I could tell you something about France, Spain, Brazil. In all these countries I'm a little bit informed about. In all these countries we had this problem between Google News and the newspaper publishers. So it's not just a strange German perspective on that. It's a very international or supranational problem. Now, in Germany there was a preliminary settlement of that. In 230, one could have thought that it was a final settlement. But now we know the story has gone on. Now we know that it was only preliminary. The publishers in Germany asked the state, politicians, to change the German copyright law in favor of them. Quite clear. They said the following: you should introduce into the copyright law the idea that there are not only authors, which are the proprietors, the owners of an article of the intellectual property, but you should also introduce the newspapers, the publishers, as such, giving the publisher a kind of authorship. And by that, giving the publisher a kind of ownership. Because what is used by Google is not only the article, but it is the kind of producing the article, giving the article a special headline, adding to the article a special photo. So it's a productive job which a newspaper redactia is doing in addition to what the journalist writing having written the article has been done. So it's a separate kind of product and a separate kind of production. And the newspaper publisher said, this should be included in the law, in the copyright. When you look at that intimately, you will find that this revolution concerning the idea of copyright and authorship. It's a revolution because a publishing company cannot be regarded as intellectual author. The redactia is doing something, producing something, but it is not an intellectual author of something. It makes, in other words, it makes the layout. So you can say the layout of newspapers should also be regarded in the same way as authors are regarded, and that means they are owners of what they've done. This was regarded from the copyright concept was a revolution. Now the point was, it was very tricky to introduce that in the law in order to have a law which is more or less intellectually understandable. It was something strange which was added to the law. Now the German government introduced this new law, and by that gave to the publishers a special authorship, commercial right ownership concerning, to be simple, the layout of articles. Now, if this is the case, the newspapers can go to Google and say, we are the owners of the layout of our newspaper and also the layout of whatever kind of article and snippets. And please, if you want to use it for your Google News information, ask us. You may get the license to use that, and then we ask you to pay for it, a license fee. This was the idea. And in a way, one could say, okay, at that point everything was set. Publishers have got a new right, commercial right, ownership right. And they now have the chance to ask Google for licenses and license fees. There was an exception in the law for extremely brief snippets. The point is, this was from the beginning an open topic, open issue, because what is brief? What is briefer than brief? What is longer? What is more than brief? And so forth. So this idea of brevity led the whole question, of course, to the courts. The courts in single cases had to decide to judge upon the question whether it was brief or not brief. But the point was, what in Google News was at all events more than brief. It was the headline, it was the first sentence, one or two sentences, and often it was the photo. So it was no debate about the question that this is more than brief. And therefore the newspapers, the publishers, could ask Google for an agreement, license agreement, and for license fees. The story has gone on. The expectable story would have been, as I said, that the newspapers asked Google to pay for the snippets. And they did that. For this purpose, they founded an association of all publishers, or the main publishers, and they gave this association the job to deal with Google about that question. How did Google react? First thing is, Google said, thank you, we are not willing to pay. And if you do not want us to use your snippets, we will list you off. You will not be taken in our list of news. Up to this very day, Google hasn't paid any euro. But they had not only the threat, but in fact, in several cases did it like that they listed off certain publishers or certain papers, newspapers. Up to this point, Google won. So has won again. Another question in this context is, what are the readers, or the recipients doing? I already asked the question, those who are reading Google News, are they really going afterwards by the newspaper? Or looking at least to the online version of this newspaper, which is also useful for the publisher, because on this online version, again, publishers have advertisements. So if you go to this online site, the publishers get some income from the fact that you are going there. But this movement normally is not the case. Readers seem to concentrate on only online information, and they seem not to go further into the articles. They do not plunge into, and so forth. This was the story until this point. The publishers had a new addition to the copyright law in their favor, and Google News didn't pay. And Google only threatened them, we will list you off. And that was the end of the story for them. And now the publishers had to think about the question, is it to my loss when I'm listed off or not? Do I want this kind of marketing, although nobody will go to my article later on? Again, it's an empirical question of marketing, a very tricky question, because you need empirical knowledge in order to answer such a question. Who knows what the readers are doing? You cannot read articles on that. You need empirical research. Now, the story goes on. The new copyright situation, Google refused any license negotiations and anything. Now, the publishers, in this tricky situation for them, acted differently. Some of them associated in this group, as I said. which tried to force Google to pay license fees. Not all of them did that. Here is one publisher, it's a big one. Süddeutsche Zeitung is one of the 4 big national papers. And also the Frankfurter, another one. Both denied to go into this war, into this struggle with Google. They denied from the beginning. They said, we don't have a chance. And we would be crazy to lose this marketing help. Although nobody will later on go to the article, but even to the newspaper research. The Süddeutsche Zeitung has given in their rules and their own house regulations, has said everybody can use our snippets if it is not used more than about 3 sentences per headline. So this was all the general solution, the general settlement which Süddeutsche publisher did. They did not participate in this new association against Google. Google in this new situation said, we will not go into any negotiations. We are not going to leave about this topic at all. And again, they offered or threatened those who do not want to be listed in our news portal will be taken off. There was a big German publisher, Springer, is also producing one of the big national, or 2 of the big national newspapers, and there's a lot of other papers, journals, very important ones. Springer was in a way the leader of this more or less aggressive strategy against Google. Springer did the following. In this situation, after Google didn't accept to pay anything, they said, we give the license unpaid to Google for, I think, 2 newspapers, and for 3 or 4 others not. So they made an experiment, one could say. Empirical experiment. What is going on when we are listed or when we are not listed? Yeah, it's clear. And then these publishers changed their strategy. They changed it into the direction, apart from the copyright question, they said it's a problem of Google's monopoly. Google is economically in a monopoly. And if newspaper publishers will not be listed off, Google is using unfairly its monopoly situation, because the publishers cannot go to another portal of the same importance, although there are other portals. For instance, in Germany there is a kind of Google which is called News, News.de, Germany. But it's so small that it's not a real competitor to Google. Google is a big shot, has practically a monopoly. Now the remaining publishers, those who still wanted to have license fees from Google, went to the office, the Federal Office of Anti-Monopoly. There's a German office for that. And they asked this office, they should go into the market and look whether Google is using the monopoly to the loss of the publishers. Now, after this office said, we are not willing to do anything, we are not interfering, we are not intervening to, we will not make another case, a monopoly, anti-monopoly case in this field. The publishers had no more arguments. And at the end, those publishers who kept on trying to get money from Google stopped this strategy or this policy. Even the big shot Springer publisher said for the last titles, for the last papers, which were listed off by Google after the invention, said, okay, we resign. And what I'm just telling you is the newspaper of the day before yesterday. So the story has developed up to yesterday, the day before yesterday. So it is an ongoing story. One could say now it's more or less settled. And it is settled in a way that Google News is not going to pay for snippets, and all the publishers are still interested, further interested, in being listed in this Google News, even to their own economic loss. That's the situation. If I were a representative of a newspaper publisher, I would ask you not only to read Google News, but buy newspapers.